Welcome to the podcast where we celebrate innovation for a happy planet. I am your host, Abigail Carroll. Salmon is second only to shrimp in seafood popularity in the U.S., but 95% of our salmon is imported, mostly from Europe and largely from big Norwegian fish farms. This creates a huge carbon footprint. So essentially, this imported salmon is destroying the wild salmon ecosystems that the very existence of aquaculture aims to protect. Marianne Naess and her husband, Norwegian expats and aquaculture professionals living in my home state of Maine, have decided to change that. They are building a scaled salmon farm in Maine to serve the regional market along the Northeast Corridor. After a tumultuous beginning, being denied access to coastal facilities with pushback largely from summer coastal residents, they are now positioned to build their fish farm up country, as we say in Maine, where the job opportunities they intend on providing are actually welcome. Marianne and her husband are also partnering with folks from the Passamaquoddy tribe to manage their hatcheries, so it looks like this story is positioned to have a happy ending. But let's hear it from Marianne. Welcome to Happy Planet, Marianne.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, I'm delighted to have you here. We are actually in the same state. A lot of the people I've been interviewing have been far flung. It's really a pleasure to speak to somebody here in Maine. And you are in land-based aquaculture. So tell me a little bit about, where you're from and how you got into this.
Well, nothing in my original background had anything to do with fish farming, but my partner started the first land-based larger fish farm back in Norway about 12, 13 years ago. So I've been watching this from the sideline. And then 6 years ago, when we moved to the US, I decided to join the company. And I've been working in land-based ever since. And I'm not looking back. I mean, we're moving forward.
So Norway really has been at the forefront of aquaculture. And typically the salmon, which is what you're interested in here in Maine, that has been out in the water. It's been, ocean-based farming. Why did you decide to pull it on land? What was the thinking behind that?
Well, there are several reasons for it, but we see a lot of challenges in the ocean. Algae blooms, sea lice, other biological challenges. And also, more importantly, here in the US, for example, there's no way you can put more into the ocean. It's outlawed in Washington state. There's only one company left here in Maine. But the US is the largest market. So to be able to produce locally in the US, we had to find other solutions.
And can we just step back a minute? I mean, there seems to be quite a bit of controversy and misunderstanding about aquaculture in general. Why do we need to farm fish?
There's an increasing demand for seafood, and the ocean has reached its capacity for what you can take out of the ocean.
And why are people gravitating to salmon? And why did you pick salmon?
Here in the US, it's the second most eaten seafood after shrimp. It has a very high likability rating. 72% of Americans love salmon. It's a well-established market, and it's also a fish that has been domesticated for decades, so you can easily farm it. And here in the US, more than 95% is imported of fresh Atlantic salmon. And it's often shipped to the US by air freight, which is not a sustainable solution going forward.
So I want to talk a little bit about how you've come to Maine, and the first step is to get permits. And there's been another land-based aquaculture solution too that's come to Maine pretty much at the same time, and it's been a really bumpy road. What are some of the headwinds that land-based aquaculture people are facing today, and how have you managed to work through them? Because I think you're on the right path now.
Well, there have been several projects proposed on the coast in Maine. We originally had one of them. It was pretty challenging, a lot of opposition to a project like that. All the local politicians, city council, state politicians, federal politicians, everyone, the governor, everyone invited us in. But we encountered some local opposition, which has happened along the coast in Maine. And one can always argue if it's environmental concerns or more NIMBYism. But once we left our former company and started 2 new companies, we decided that it's not worth it being on the coast. There are too many challenges. So we moved away from the coast and found this great site. It's the best site we have ever seen, actually, in Millinocket, Maine.
Fantastic.
And so far, it's been a very smooth path moving forward. We have this great site with a lot of savings. It's on the previous Northern Paper Mill site in Maine. It's actually a sediment lagoon from the old paper mill, and we've done extensive testing on it. It has no contaminants like PFAS, dioxins, PCBs, so it's clean. So we're doing an in-situ remediation. On the site, it had a discharge pipe, intake water infrastructure. It had behind-the-meter access to hydropower. So it has a non-carbon power source, reliable on site, and also a reasonable cost. So the site was just terrific. There's also a local economic development nonprofit that we worked with, and they've been great to work with, our Katahdin. And it's also our landlord, but they've helped us a lot in terms of getting this up and running. So it's been a great partnership, and we have obtained permits in record time and at much lower cost than anyone else. So we kept a low profile in the media, not to draw attention to it, but we're pretty much good to go.
So really the problem and the resistance is on the coast, and that's kind of interesting because you have to, in theory, we're all about fisheries on the coast, but are land-based facilities just not really considered fisheries by the locals? Is that part of the problem, or were they really worried about other issues?
I don't think it was necessarily an environmental issue. It was more, is it the right fit for the community? Maybe you could call it NIMBYism. And, one has to accept that too, that going into community and proposing large facilities might not be the right fit. And I think that's what it boiled down to. And I think it took a lot of people by surprise, our local advisors and politicians as well. But, that's just the development of the coast, the privatization and gentrification of the coast. And it's just not a right fit.
But rural Maine needs new opportunities and new growth. And so this might turn out to be a really great business opportunity and working opportunity for people in rural Maine that are looking for jobs.
I think it is. And I also, I've heard, I think it's an oversimplification to say that you need to go into industrial areas to put a fish farm in those areas. My impression of the Katahdin region is, yes, they need jobs, but they love their town and the region, and they're also concerned about the environmental impact. So you have to have very strict standards wherever you go, and as long as you meet those, I think people are welcoming you. But there's you can't just place anything anywhere just because it's a former working class community. Right. So I think you have to be cognizant of that as well.
So you guys have really put sustainability forward in your whole business plan. Can you describe a little bit how your operation works and where you've really highlighted sustainability, like the hydropower? I know you had inputs and outputs that were very eco-friendly and eco-minded. I'd love to hear more about just how it all works.
Right. Well, I think, hydropower is one important thing because, RAS land-based facilities are fairly energy intensive. So using non-carbon power source is important to take down the CO2 footprint. Another aspect is the water use. There's been a lot of push in the industry here in the US to go to zero water exchange. We don't believe in that. Yes, you have to reduce your water consumption, but you can never compromise fish welfare. And you do need to have an additional exchange rate for the fish. So what does it come down to then? It's the water treatment. We have implemented the highest degree of water treatment So yes, you're putting some water back into the ecosystem, but it's highly treated. And more than 99% of the nutrients are removed before it's discharged into the river again. So that's very important. Another thing that we have said is that we're not using fish meal in our fish feed. So we're not taking fish out of the ocean to create fish meal to feed our fish. There will still be some marine components like fish oil, algae oil, etc. But we're replacing the fish meal with other protein sources in the fish feed. And our partner Skredding across the border in Canada has developed a commercial feed that actually fulfill those requirements. And we also building this facility directly on the ground. The site itself has glacial till. We don't have to have a lot of rebar and concrete foundations and slabs, so we're using less concrete in building the facility. That's also, an important factor in terms of carbon footprint.
So on the market side, I'm just kind of curious, are people getting that message? How are you going to get your fish to people who care about these issues and help them make better decisions about which farm that they buy from?
We have a distributor. We have two distributors that will, work with us on getting the message out, and it's more the origin branding from Maine, being a sustainable product from Maine, than actually a consumer brand. But getting into the right outlets is important, and having it in the fresh, seafood case as labeled as locally produced, sustainably produced. There's also possibilities of looking into full traceability of each batch of fish, what the fish have eaten, and when it's produced, when it's harvested, etc. So we're also looking into solutions for that.
So along the course of this journey, you've learned quite a bit about Maine's indigenous groups, in particular the Penobscot tribe, and you have a business collaboration with them. Could you just tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, my partner Eric and I, we started two companies, and it actually started with Katahdin Salmon. Before we announced the project in Millinocket, I reached out to the tribe and said I wanted to inform them about the project out of respect for their ties to the Penobscot River. So they didn't read about it in the paper, and we had some good discussions, and they also showed interest in collaborating on the project. And then we also happened to develop another company, a broodstock facility, together with a couple of the Walton family funds, and they were also interested in that. And it turns out that we're now building it on tribal land in Indian Island in Old Town. And the Penobscot is one of the owners of the other company that we also work on. And we have a close dialogue on Katahdin Salmon as well. And we share information. And I think that's, it's a very good working relationship. And they care deeply about the river and the health of the river and the health of the fish. So that's, to our mutual benefit. And it's been very good working relationship so far.
That's really exciting. So, and that business, if I understand, is already up and running?
It's being developed. It's in permitting and design as well. And construction is planned to start this coming fall. So it's still in it's also in development. So currently, the fish for that company, Samogen, is being raised at CCAR in Franklin in collaboration with University of Maine.
So it sounds like outside of this original coastal pushback, you've actually had an incredibly rich experience here in Maine with a lot of collaboration with the university and the Penobscot tribe and other groups. Are there any other organizations that you think were particularly helpful in your journey here as a business in Maine?
We work closely with politicians in Augusta and local politicians. We work closely with our Katahdin, our partner. I think having been in Maine for a while and been through, the I would say two extremes in the industry, one of the more challenging ones, and also this one that has gone very smoothly. You build strong relationships, and that's important. It's easy to have supporters when everything goes right, but you also need friends that can help you, overcome challenges that you face. And there will always be challenges in developing a large project. One of the challenges that, a lot of these companies coming from the outside face, that you don't have those relationships. You don't understand what's behind the lines and what's not being said, and how you navigate, in the culture and in the community.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. I'd like to thank Gulf of Maine Research Institute and Bold Ocean Ventures for their support of Happy Planet Podcast. GMRI and Bold Ocean Ventures have partnered to create a mission-driven venture capital fund supporting the growth of innovative, sustainable, ocean-related businesses. Listeners may remember Patrick Breeding, who was on our show last year to talk about Marianne skincare and its clinically proven formula that uses glycoproteins from Maine lobsters to treat eczema and dry, damaged skin. This company has since become wildly successful with their lobster lotion, and Patrick is inviting listeners to a 20% discount on their products by using the coupon code HAPPYPLANET on their website, Marianne Skincare. I actually use this product myself, and I highly recommend it. For a blue economy to thrive, people need to use more sustainable products. But which products? And will consumers actually adopt them? Innovators like you are hustling to figure this out. Spark number 9 can tell you if there's demand for your product. Spark markets your product before it's built using online advertising so you launch smarter. Have a big idea? Vet it with Spark before you build. Visit Spark online at www.sparkno9.com or find them on LinkedIn. Hey, and I want to give a quick shout out to all of the blue economy folks out there. Do not miss the Oceanovation Festival on June 19th and 20th in The Hague, Netherlands. Join over 450 global innovators, investors, and experts transforming the blue economy for a healthier ocean. For more information, visit their website, oceanovation.live. Welcome back to the podcast. So are there any headwinds now? I mean, where are you in you're waiting on some permits? And so what's the time frame here?
Well, actually, we have obtained the permits that we have applied for so far in record time, which is we're very appreciative of. Currently, we're starting design. I think one of the biggest challenges in today's market is financing. And for us, with Maine's reputation and all the challenges that have been in Maine, and the lack of domain expertise in the industry here in the U.S., we're kind of waiting to obtain our first, most crucial permits to be able to access funding from overseas as well. Because there, the impression is, we know the industry, we can look at, we can differentiate good cases from bad cases, but we're scared of the U.S. and the litigation you face or the permitting challenges you face. So once you overcome those, that kind of opens the door to a bigger market. So I think that's been one of the challenges, in this project, but we're moving forward. So at this point, we plan to start detailed design this summer.
That's great. And so how much salmon do you think you're going to produce?
The goal for the farm in Millinocket is 10,000 metric tons of head-on gutted fish. That will be approximately 22 million pounds. 5-6 years ago, when we first came to the U.S., a lot of these farms were mega farms, and they were one bigger than the other. We found what we believe is a sweet spot. It's big enough to be commercially viable, but it's not a mega farm like a monstrous farm like 50,000, 200,000, etc. And you quickly grow into, I would say, diseconomy of scale instead of economy of scale. Just because it gets too complex and logistics is very challenging.
I like that expression, the diseconomy of scale. So what kind of impact are you hoping to have on your home state of Maine?
Well, first of all, of course, we want to create jobs in Millinocket. And also in Millinocket, I think, being one of the catalysts for change. They've been working really hard to attract businesses, and We hope to start that snowball effect where you can actually attract more businesses too, and the more families to the community. It's a lovely community up there. So, and of course, being able to supply the market, regionally with fresh fish produced in the U.S. I think it's a sustainability issue, not importing by air freight from overseas. It's a food security issue, having full traceability. And just look at what happened with global supply chains during the pandemic, and producing it closer to the consumer, and also hopefully pride of Maine. Maine has a long seafood tradition, so being able to diversify Maine's seafood economy, and bringing something else to the table. And Maine also has a good seafood branding story to tell. So we're happy to be in Maine.
Yeah. So I'm curious because Maine has kind of blown up in this blue economy. The Rue Institute, GMRI has an accelerator. Accelerators are popping up everywhere. University of Maine is really deeply entrenched in the entrepreneurial economy. How do you see sort of Maine's role in this entrepreneurship and blue economy, and how does it compare to what you saw back in Norway?
I don't really think they're that comparable in a sense. Norway developed the salmon industry into I would call it kind of a public-private collaboration, and very uniform. They were able to market it. It was developed with different standards and different time. I think Maine's culture is more individualistic and more fragmented. Not that that is a bad thing, but I think Maine's economy will be more seafood economy will be more diverse, a mix of smaller and maybe some mid-scale, a little bit larger developments. But I think it's really positive that you see development in the industry in Maine. I think one of the challenges you see here in Maine is a lot of entrepreneurship, but to be able to sustain the growth over time, you also need to build a resilient and commercially viable industry as well. I mean, it's hard to be a small company. So hopefully there will be collaborations and cooperatives that can help smaller players.
So, I've quoted and I've heard this statistic a lot about, by 2050, we need to double the world's food production. How do you see the food playing out in this sort of climate and sort of just population crisis?
Well, of course, you need a lot more seafood production. Seafood is actually a very sustainable protein. I think that plays an important role. The ocean is, especially for salmon, kind of saturated, at least in Norway and in Chile and places you see. So you need to find new solutions, being offshore or on land, and you need to develop solutions that are sustainable. For example, it's a big issue for me that we use non-carbon or hydropower, so we don't leave a huge footprint. And also what's important is we're in a climate where the temperatures in the water that we take in is suitable for salmon farming. And if you place it somewhere warmer, and the salmon needs to have 12 degrees Celsius or 54 degrees Fahrenheit, you have to cool the water, and you spend a lot of energy doing that. So finding places where we can grow the right species in the right area, regardless of being on land or in using technology or not. I think you need to look at it more holistically. But yes, everything has to come from, the growth has to come from aquaculture in one shape or form. So I think that is vital. Mm-hmm. And of course, replacing some of the less sustainable terrestrial proteins, I think is important too. But that's a whole other discussion than this, what we're bringing up here.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's also why you're doing what you're doing, probably on some level. So what advice do you have for entrepreneurs today, let's say in the food industry, because that's where you are?
To succeed with a startup, I call it, the 3 R's. You have to be resilient. Of course, there are a lot of challenges. It's not easy. A lot of sleepless nights, a lot of step forwards, a lot of hard prioritizations, and what you can do and what you can't do, and what we can afford to do. It's hard work, but it's worth it. But it's really, really hard work. And I think relationships and cultivating those relationships, they're perishable. They have to be cultivated, and they're also reciprocal. And you're not going to see people fighting for you if they don't believe they can benefit from it, or if there is a greater benefit to it. Make sure that people see what how the community benefits, how they benefit. That's important. And I think also building a business that can grow, meaning what kind of roles you have in the company, what kind of people do you have. For example, I build organizations, I put together teams. My partner Eric can do a lot of the same things, but he's also a great visionary. He can take, look at a trend and make it into something tangible that he can make a company out of. And then when we started hiring people, we have a lot of people with deep knowledge, production experience, engineers that are can complement what we're doing. So having, building teams that could take it from a startup till a thriving business is important.
Yeah. I like the sort of reference to team building, because I think we don't think enough about the team. We're very focused in the United States on the entrepreneur, and we celebrate the entrepreneur, but it's the team around the entrepreneur that's really helping the vision, move forward. And I don't think they get enough credit. And I just don't think we're thinking enough about them. So I'm glad you said that. And you also mentioned sort of the ups and downs, the roller coasters, the struggles of the entrepreneur. What kind of resources do we need today to help entrepreneurs, not just with their business, but dealing with the sort of emotional roller coaster of living with that uncertainty in such a public and high stakes way?
I think, especially in our industry, I see less than, for example, in forestry and energy in terms of non-dilutive capital in the early stages. That is important too, having access to that, because that's also, usually when you see challenges, in an early stage. And of course, networks, learning from others, collaborating, a sense of support system behind you. I think there are a lot of good things, going on, but there's still more that could be done in terms of helping out in the early stage, making sure that the organizations that are being used to implement the state's strategy in growth in aquaculture and forestry and agriculture actually is aligned with that vision.
Well, I hope you make it. I think you're well on your way to making it.
Well, so do we.
So how many years before we can buy Katahdin salmon from Maine?
We plan to start construction of the facility, do the design and remediation this year, start construction next year, and then put eggs in 26. So you have to wait till 28 to get fish in the market here in the US or here in Maine from Katahdin Salmon. 28. It's a long process.
Okay.
So.
Well, it's exciting, and I wish you well. And thank you for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
A big thank you to Marianne for coming on the podcast. I look forward to eating Katahdin salmon someday in the near future. For more information about Katahdin salmon, check out our show notes. Thank you once again for listening. Please follow Happy Planet wherever you tune in and leave us a rating and review. It really does help new listeners discover the show. Happy Planet was reported and hosted by me, Abigail Carroll. I am also the executive producer. Zoe Bailey is our sound editor, and composer George Brandel Egloff created our theme music. Learn more about my work and get in touch by visiting happyplanetpodcast.com.